Moving for better land. The enormous amount of land that could be obtained easily on the North American continent is very important in explaining why so many people moved west. The land held many dangers: wild animals, fast rivers, steep mountains, angry Native Americans. But the land also held many good things, such as lots of fertile ground for crops, herds of wild animals for food and clothing, and gold and silver for mining. Whenever jobs became hard to find or farm soil did not produce crops that were as good as in the past, Americans were able to leave their homes and move to areas on the frontier where land was available to start new farms. The constant economic attraction of inexpensive land on the frontier, combined with the problems in areas of the East, caused settlers to move west. It's important for you to understand that not all land was equally valuable to settlers moving west. Settlers first moved to areas of the country that had three things: land that was flat, fertile, and easy to farm, a climate that was moderate, and water that could be used for drinking and transportation. The state of Missouri and Arkansas filled with people and became states before 1840. The land in the eastern part of those states was good for farming because it was in the Mississippi River Valley. The land was rich because the river occasionally flooded. The Great Plains did not attract settlers, not an example of moving west for land in 1840s. The Great Plains, shown in this picture, were west of the Mississippi River Valley. Most settlers did not stop in the Great Plains. Instead, they traveled on to the west coast. In Chapter 2, you read about the Great Plains. You may remember that the ground there was covered with sod. It is impossible to plow the ground and break up the sod without steel plows, which had not been invented in the 1840s. Settlers thought the Great Plains were uninhabitable because they could not farm there. They did not yet have the capability to farm on the grass and range lands of the Great Plains. Instead of settling on the Great Plains, settlers traveled further west to land in the West Coast, where the states of Washington, Oregon, and California are today. That area is shaded on the map. Settlers traveled across the Great Plains on trails that had been blazed by earlier pioneers. 3 of those trails can be seen on a map following: the Oregon Trail, the California Trail, and the Santa Fe Trail were trails that people took through the Great Plains to get west. The Great Plains were not settled heavily until many years later. When those areas were settled, settlers first moved to areas where they were rivers for transportation. Settlers tended to avoid areas where the land was not flat and fertile. The climate was very cold or very hot, there was not rivers deep enough to use for transportation, or there was not enough clean drinking water. The Southwest, northern, and central areas of the country were settled last because those areas lacked either land that was easy to farm, clean water, or a moderate climate. Those areas were not settled until a later period of expansion because settlers did not have the tools and knowledge to survive in those areas. The Great Plains, in the center of the United States, were not settled until a steel plow was invented that was capable of plowing the sod. Oregon Country, an example of moving west for land in the 1840s. Oregon Country started at the Rocky Mountains and extended west to the Pacific Ocean. Its northern border was Alaska, and its southern border was California. Oregon Country, in 1803, when President Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, he sent Lewis and Clark to explore the newly acquired territory. They ended up in Oregon Country. The explorations of Lewis and Clark helped establish American fur trading in the area, which was the first stage of settlement. Both the British and the Americans had fur trading businesses in Oregon Country. Beginning in 1818, Britain and the United States agreed to occupy the Oregon Country together. After the fur trappers and hunters, missionaries came to Oregon country in the 1830s to convert the local Native Americans to Christianity. The missionaries wrote home about the wonderful farmland in Oregon country. In 1841, a wagon trail of 80 men, women, and children made its way to Oregon country to set up farms. The 2,000-mile journey took 6 months. People felt that the own rich farmland, which they did not have to buy, made any hardship they endured on their journey worthwhile. Those settlers wrote back home and told more people about the rich farmland in Oregon country. In the spring of 1843, another wagon train with 200 families and a total of 1,000 people left for Oregon country. The route they followed became known as the Oregon Trail. Other wagon trains in 1843 brought another 2,000 people to the rich farmlands in Oregon country. After that, wagon trains left each spring for Oregon, bringing thousands more settlers. People who wanted to move to Oregon were said to have Oregon fever. The move to Oregon country was an example of how people moved west to gain good farmland in the 1840s. Moving for natural resources. The abundance of natural resources available in the North American continent also helps to explain why so many people moved west. Whenever a mine produced less mineral ore or the supply of trees ran out, Americans were able to leave their homes and move to areas on the western frontier that provided more natural resources. The availability of natural resources on the frontier caused some settlers to move west. The California Gold Rush, an example of people moving west for natural resources in the 1840s. People from the east coast of the United States had been buying goods from California, mostly cowhides, for several years before the 1840s. The goods from California were transported to the East Coast by ships. The crews on those ships brought back stories of California and created interest in the territory. Settlers who moved to California usually followed the same trail as people who followed the Oregon Trail, but turned off to the south after crossing the Rocky Mountains. That route is called the California Trail. They also could have taken a southern route through Santa Fe, New Mexico. That route was called the Santa Fe Trail. By 1845, approximately 1,000 settlers had moved to California for the rich farmland. In 1848, California became part of the United States. You will read about how this happened in a later section in this chapter. Later that same year, gold was discovered in California. Gold was much more valuable in the 1840s than it is today. A small amount of gold was worth a fortune. A few days after the discovery, word of the gold find reached San Francisco, and soon the news spread throughout the world. The news of the discovery of gold in California started the California Gold Rush. A gold rush is when thousands of people from all over the world hurry to an area where gold has been discovered. In 1849, the attraction of gold caused a gold rush of over 90,000 people from all over the world to California. People from China come for the gold rush. Steamboats could travel across the Pacific Ocean from China to California in less time than it took to travel by land from the East Coast to California. In 1849, thousands of Chinese men came to California by steamboat to pan for gold. Large numbers of men from Mexico and South America also came to California. The white citizens of California did not like miners from other countries. Special taxes were passed on foreign miners that U.S. citizens did not have to pay. In general, the white citizens of California did not like immigrants, whether they were miners or not. They made the Chinese different from other immigrants was that because they were Asian, they were not eligible to become citizens of the United States. The law that set up the rules for immigrants to become citizens had been written back in 1793 and did not have any provision for people from Asia. The white citizens of California did not want Chinese people coming to America, but they could not do anything about it. The U.S. Congress controlled the immigration laws, not the citizens of California. Because they could not keep the Chinese out of California, the white citizens decided to tax the Chinese by discouraging them from settling. Special taxes were passed on Chinese laundries and restaurants in San Francisco. At first, gold was abundant and easy to find. A few miners quickly made fortunes, but thousands more lost everything they owned trying to find gold. Because the land was rich and the climate was mild, many of the people who were unable to find gold stayed in California